Hey everybody, thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you coming to these monthly presentations, and please remember that we do record them and we try to share them with you afterwards, so that if you picked up some great new information tonight, don't be shy about sharing that with friends and family. We want to get this word out, and no better way to do that than to share the recording afterwards. We will be taking questions, but we would like you to type your questions into the chat box so that we don't interrupt Dr. Olson. But I will be curating your questions from the chat box. And at the end of the presentation, we will do a Q&A. So at that time, I'll read the questions and Dr. Olson can answer them. So please don't unmute yourself. It's not that we don't love to hear your voice, but it just becomes a lot more manageable when we do it that way. So let me introduce our guest tonight. Dr. Annette Olson is the founder and executive director of Climate Steps, a volunteer blog organization community focused on providing information about impactful individual action, personal, social, political, and more. Annette has served as a scientific advisor for the Smithsonian Institution, the U.S. Geological Survey, the USGS, and other federal agencies. She earned a BS with honors from Baylor University in Texas and a Ph.D. in biology from University of Miami, Florida. She's currently based in Washington, D.C., but tonight she's joining us from Texas. And Dr. Olson, thank you so much. And please share your screen and take it away.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you. Yes, I would say that right now my father is very happy that I'm here with him in Texas versus Washington, D.C. So I'm here through the end of the month, but I'm based in Washington. So I'll share my screen, and I'm going to start off with a little bit of, whoops, hold on one sec. Have to move my screen over so I can, there we go. Okay, can people see my screen or
Yes.
the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what I do now is I'm going to walk you through, let me go back. So I'm going to walk you through kind of both my organization and then also some of the best ways to take climate steps. And so I'm going to give a little bit of background first on the organization. This is going to be the outline of the talk. I have to move this window here out of the way so I can actually see what I'm talking about. So, I'll give you an idea so you know what's coming is we're going to take a little bit of time, just like 10 minutes tops, to talk about the evolution of climate steps because it helps bring in kind of why we're growing rapidly and why we're taking it to the next level. When we talk about the taking it to the next level, one of the things that we really need to understand is does individual impact actually work? I mean, does it exist? Does individual action actually exist? And what is needed within it? And kind of some definitions, actually, because there's a lot of confusion out there. And then, of course, our mission. I'm walking backwards here on those little bullets. And then based on this kind of the understanding of individual impact, I'll give some ideas for New Year's resolutions, post-dated New Year's resolutions, things that people can work on for the next year. And then some of what Climate Steps is doing to help people get there and where we're going. And then I have an ask at the end. So a little bit about myself. Kind of now I'm an environmental scientist. I used to be a field biologist, but I spent 23 years working for the Smithsonian, the US Geological Survey, which actually does have a biology department in it, which most people don't know. And then the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And for that, I was a troubleshooter really for a lot of research programs throughout the US and internationally, um, which was totally fascinating. But earlier this year, I decided to that I needed to devote full time to action. So I'm gone from science now to action. So I'm actually helping run 3 organizations. Climate Steps is the one I'm focusing on. That's what I founded, and it's the one that especially has a strong need. But I'll also mention Green Neighbors DC, which the little icon for it is this house surrounded by the leaves, and which is a local community group, which is action oriented, community oriented. And then Earth Hero is a global climate action app that I helped found, and with Peter Kalmus, and a great coder, Ben Gerald, who who really kind of instigated Peter and I into working on this app. So we're actually really tied between Climate Steps and Earth Hero, and I strongly suggest that check it out and see. This is the homepage for Climate Steps. Right now, it's going to change actually. Carl mentioned that kind of a volunteer / blog / community. Climate Steps started off as a blog and has since changed into an information hub. So we have a lot of articles down here. This one is actually announcing a new page called Climate Songs. But what we try and do is we have storytelling articles about steps people have taken, and then we have summary pages about particular subjects with resources, and it's being built up slowly with the help of volunteers, but it's revving up a lot. For an example, one of my next one of my next stories is going to be about 3 submarine engineers in the UK who took a massive climate step and decided that they were going to write children's books about the environment. So I've interviewed them to kind of find out why they decide, what's the trigger point for actually somebody taking action. So that story is coming. So Climate Steps was actually founded as a blog at friends' request to outline different climate actions. 2 friends knew I was very frustrated 4 years ago about the lack of potentially the lack of action on climate change. And so they took me to lunch and asked me what they could do to take climate action. And at the end of the conversation, they said, oh, you should start a blog. And I've blogged a lot. I've blogged for the Washington Post about green roofs, and I have my own adventure blog. So it's like, yeah, I'll start it. And then I realized I couldn't really quit it. There was always so much to work on. In 2017, I founded also a Facebook community, so to go with it, and I'll explain that just below. So today, the website is a publishing platform. We have guest authors and resources. And then the website and the Facebook platform have volunteers and users who interact with the website. So, well, of course, with website, but they're idea generating, they're researching for articles, they're writing if they're invited, and they're reviewing. So it's a great combination, actually. It's not just a group where we post articles and people read them, and that's it. It's very interactive. it's worked well and it's going to hopefully continue, even though, whoops, excuse me, even though it's going to be a much larger group here soon. So we also have strong interaction with our partner Earth Hero, which is the app I described a few minutes ago. So the Earth Hero is all about specific actions that people can take. I'll describe it in a little bit. So the current climate steps component include a website, Facebook, also a little bit of Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter is kind of a little bit on hiatus, Reddit, but also besides our app done in partnership with Earth Hero, we're also creating a central open source database about actions that people can take. A description of the action, tips for how to do an action, but also we have people working with us on Earth Hero who are assigning, who are researching and assigning carbon emission figures to particular actions. Now, there are some actions in there that it's very difficult to assign carbon emissions to, but we have a system of Earth Hero points. So over here, basically some of the partners we have is growing in terms of, we've got a number in discussion, and then we have 15 occasional volunteers. So this is the Facebook group, and a lot of the action is happening on social media. We have basically total over 5,000 people, and that's still a small group for Facebook, but I'm actually kind of glad because I really want Climate Steps to grow hand in hand with the people. I don't want the Facebook group to all of a sudden explode, and we're not there to really help mentor people and you know, share resources. We need the we have 8 moderators right now, and even now we can't keep up sometimes. So we need to be sure that it's done well. We want to really be quality and not just talk about numbers. So when I first started the Facebook group, we used to have a lot of people who were just starting their climate action journey. And now it's definitely more of a mix with greenies, who I call greenies, basically people who are experienced in taking action. Often it's more public action. So there can be tension between these 2 groups, between those who want to start off simply and individually often. Not always, and those who are very much large scale action. And I'm going to go into that a little bit, that kind of tension and what it actually influences in terms of individual action. So about 30% of people know about Project Drawdown. And if you don't, I highly recommend you check it out. I'll put the link in here. I forgot to put the link. And there is a lack of knowledge in the group about what some of the most impactful actions are. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do with Climate Steps, is not only show the breadth of actions that people can take, but really some of the most impactful. So we have urban, we have suburban and rural folks, and actions can differ among them. We have renters versus homeowners. Our member Jessica is always reminding us that as a renter, she can't take a number of the actions that we're discussing in the group. Mm-hmm. The average median age is in the 40s, and we have farmers, we have 9-to-5ers, we have a lot of retirees. It's very diverse, which is nice.
That's good.
So let me go back. We also started to go global, and we have folks especially people in westernized countries, but we're also getting a lot of people from many others. We have like 150 countries represented. We're also on Instagram, where we have not, I try and do weekly. We're a little bit behind because of Christmas and a family illness, but each image represents a climate step that people can do. So you probably can't see, but the lower right image, you can't see it fully on my screen because I cut it off, unfortunately. But this is a comparison of a green grass, well, like a yard done with grass versus a freedom lawn, which is not done with grass, and during a drought. And you can see which one is greener, which one, we have an article which explains which one is far, far, far better for the climate than a grass yard. So, we'll talk about Facebook, Instagram. The Earth Hero app is a nonprofit. We're all volunteers. We have about 28 people on board globally. We have our minimum viable product is out there. So if you go to the store, you can find us. And we're very science-based. Peter and I, both being scientists, Peter is all about the carbon emissions, and I'm all about the biology and impact on the environment. And then of course, we have other people, other scientists who have been joining. But we're also trying to make it fun. And I mentioned the open source database. Okay, so that's what it's been up to this moment. And now the question is taking it to the next level. And so it's been 4 years and 2 days later from when I did my first blog that Climate Steps has been officially incorporated in the state of Washington, D.C. As a nonprofit. So now we have to get our 501c3 with the IRS. And this is thanks to the help of Barry Hart via the Green Pro Bono Foundation. So Climate Steps mission has been and will continue to be to answer this question: what can I do to fight climate change? You come across Twitter questions on Facebook, on comments after the end of articles in the media, is what can we do? Someone please tell us, give us some ideas of what we can do to help fight climate change. So our mission, and a rephrase of that, is to provide knowledge, means, and mentoring to any and all individuals who want to take action on the climate crisis. So the question is, what do people want in terms of information for taking action? They want ideas, a breadth of ideas, and they want to know priorities by the amount of impact. They also want to know specifics on how best to take an action. So what essentially does eating more plant-based meals actually mean? They want tools to help them, templates to write letters. They want action plans with reminders. They want especially to help others change their behavior. So I mentioned the templates for letter writing, but it's not just to politicians, it's to industry, it's to civic groups. And they want links to local events, volunteer opportunities, and hold on, I have to move my window again. I can see, I can't see what that last, hold on, let me do this down. There we go, and meetings. So this is what people want, but now that we're an organization, there's really we should ask the question first, is there any point to individuals taking action? I mean, how do we justify climate steps? There's a lot of talk out there that collective action is the only way to go. Also, why should we take this action when industry has been the primary, cause of climate change? So I'm going to talk about these two different points briefly, kind of under the header of understanding individual impact, the responsibility, and then can we make an impact? And then I'll be talking about some other things about how we can best take action. So should we feel guilt, and do we have responsibility? And yes, some, but we are consumers. Some of us try very hard not to be. I try and grow as much food as I possibly can in my backyard. But corporations do create, market, and push new products, especially push. But we are the ones that purchase and then usually discard the products. Another aspect is that corporations do consist of people. So in a very broad sense, not, on average, humans are responsible. And so we do hold some responsibility. But what we should not do is let corporation leaders or the 1% manipulate us into holding the blame personally. We do litter, but we aren't the ones who fought direct deposit laws. We do buy gasoline, but we're not the ones who hid research and science and basically lied about the impact and still pushed products. So the corporation leaders and the 1% of people who are so rich that they own multiple yachts and just use resources like crazy should hold most of the blame. But because we only have 5 years left to really make an impact on climate change before climate change is on a path to lead to extremely dangerous environments, we all should have responsibility and focus on the future. So the answer is yes and no, and then yes again. But can individuals actually make an impact? And of course, you already know what my answer is going to be to that. But there's a discussion in the ether about collective action is the only way in order to yield large-scale change. And that is very true, except for the only part. Governments have to make regulations. Corporations have to change to achieve in time. So a lot of climate leaders out there, they want people to join large-scale efforts, to join protests, to really talk to come in mass to the representative, so the representatives know that so many of their constituents support climate change action, or to donate or join groups that can leverage action at scale. The NRDC, who can bring lawyers to court and do some things like that. But there's also a misconception that individual action, there's a lot of people who, when they hear the word individual action, they think of personal action. They think of people insulating their houses or installing light bulbs, and what I like to call the glossy magazine approach, where there's one page in a magazine that talks about, oh, here's how to help save the environment. recycle and insulate and all these things. But there's actually, but that's kind of personal action. That's for your own home, your own scale, the small scale versus the large scale. And we'll get to scale here in a minute. But individual action is actually broader. It's broader than personal. It includes social, it includes political action, it includes action for changing corporations. It's also very powerful. You can remain an individual in your action and you can still create significant impact. And that's what I think some people, well, anyway, we'll go into some examples and then you can decide. Now, of course, in order to be part of a collective, individuals do need to make that decision to do so, and that's a very great climate action. And so for climate steps, we're going to be providing information and the means to find opportunities like that. But when we're told that only collective actions are really the useful actions, this is actually very limiting. It can limit people taking action in the first place. First, it's very discouraging and dismissive language. Yes, I've definitely heard the dismissive tone in this. But a lot of people aren't social. They're not ready to join a large organization. And then some of the collective action that people are recommended to take are themselves limiting. They really don't take advantage of the power of the people. And that sounds like a great slogan, but anyway, so, and 4 ones that I've heard over and over again are go vote. And this happened right after the election of the soon to be previous administration. People will say, well, how can I fight climate change with this? And people kept replying, vote, vote, vote. Well, there were another 2 years before people could vote on representatives, and then another 4 years before people could vote on the presidential candidates. So what are we supposed to do the other 364 days? And join an organization. People often don't know which one. And do I become a member, donate money, and hope they do a good job? Talk to your congressional representative. That's really good. But that doesn't always, especially for certain people in certain states and communities, that is not a viable option. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I don't even have a voting member of Congress or of the Senate. I have no representative I can talk to. Then a 4th one is protest. And Extinction Rebellion, however, some of their actions and some of the actions of other protesters can scare some. And there's also been several studies that up until recently questioned the effectiveness of protests. And I say until recently because the youth movement kind of changed that. A lot of the youth protests and the families coming together for that have actually made a difference. But there are other issues. I, for one, have rheumatoid arthritis. I cannot march very far. I can't get out there. There are people who can't afford, they don't have the money to deal with being arrested, paying fines, or anything like that. So So these collective actions can be limiting, but also individual action, that side of the coin can be so much more than people think. The first example is that large scale action happens because someone, I like to say, I've been called a snowflake, so I'll just admit it. A snowflake causes the snowball to roll, causing an avalanche. And as Margaret Mead has said, it's the only way change happens. So Citizen Climate Lobby started with one person and went global. Earth Hero, the app, started with one person, 3 people, then went to 28 and now has 6,000 plus users. Climate Reality started with Al Gore talking to 26 people in a barn. So people can start actions, but as I said before, you can also be impactful as individuals. And these are 5 ways that you can be impactful as an individual. So in various spheres, natural sciences, economics, research, energy. So the first one's consumer impact. And we're all aware, the power sort of the consumer. Corporations still push products, but numbers do add up. This blue stick of dynamite over here is meant to actually represent a water bottle with a straw in it, and that's as best my drawing could do. But this here is a water dispenser in the National Airport. And I took this picture 2 years ago, over 2 years ago now. And it had already prevented 1,145,000 plastic bottles from being bought and used and then discarded. So Project Drawdown, which actually studies the life cycle of different solutions and what's needed, what are the most impactful solutions based on these life cycle analyses. Their top 5 solutions all have personal components to them. Refrigeration, that has definitely a large corporation component, but it also, we have refrigerators we need to maintain. We shouldn't discard air conditioning units without the what used to be Freon withdrawn from it, etc. Food waste is huge, on a huge problem with climate change. And as I'm sure y'all have all heard, meat is as well. Some other studies have shown the relative weight of personal impact. But what these studies also don't show is kind of the social impacts of us individuals taking these actions. There's a multiplier effect to these. Actually, let me go back. I'll talk about the multiplier effect in a minute. Another way individuals can really make change is changing our public infrastructure, because that does have a huge multiplier effect. So all these pins here are actually pins of people in Portland who have installed solar energy on their residential, on their homes. This image actually was also taken 2 years ago, and I need to talk to Brian about getting a new screenshot. So numbers alone are obviously impressive, but what this does is the more people who install solar, the more a utility has to change their own equipment to allow for solar, to allow for a distributed grid. And once you force a utility to make that change, you open up the door for things to be much easier for others to take that step. So solar forces utilities to change, so does wind, to a distributed grid model. Electric vehicles. Buying an electric vehicle, you also change the charging infrastructure. You know, people are installing outlets to charge, but so when I was at AAAS, I helped review a lot of incoming research proposals. And what a lot of proposals now are, what a lot of researchers are planning to study is the ability to create a grid so that not only are we charging electric vehicles, but as electric vehicles are parked somewhere, they can be plugged in and they can charge the city in turn. So, you know, these changes are happening, and by helping them along, we are helping speed up infrastructure change. Biking forces road design changes. Most of these are happening at more local scales, like your immediate neighborhood, but it has a widespread impact because it makes it easier for others to take action. So, okay, sorry, I'm just looking at my time. And then another important thing as an individual is helping change our community. This is a picture of a potluck I threw in my backyard. It was vegetarian, vegan, and we watched a climate change movie, invited all the neighbors, people I met showed up. It was fantastic. That was, of course, pre-COVID. So there's social change that's passive, and there's active social change. So passive social change, you can still do the individual actions that you want to do, and perhaps secondarily, without you putting effort into it, it creates a culture shift. Behavior change studies have found that neighbors influencing neighbors is the best way to create a culture shift. And by doing it by competition or inspiration. And solar is a key example. And there's a New York Times article that mentions a research study behind this idea of behavioral contagion. And basically, researchers found that once a person installs solar, within 4 months on average, a neighbor is inspired to install solar. Within a year, that's changed to, I believe, 8. I forgot the number. Within 2 years, 32 neighbors have installed solar because one person opened the door. Green roofs is another one. I installed a green roof and I inspired somebody else to do it. It was fantastic. Let's see. And also things that weren't socially acceptable before, you can influence whether they become acceptable. Right now, one of the big things is thrift store clothing. Secondhand clothing has become very much the thing, in part because of COVID, but it was already happening before. And we need to change from this thing that was pushed on us in a way called fast fashion. And so now some consumers are rebelling and starting secondhand shopping. Then another passive one is what I like to call the laundry flag, hanging your laundry. People see it, and they feel more confident in hanging their own laundry. But if you hope for it to become a sign, if you mean it as a way of communication, then you're starting to lean towards active social action. If you talk about it, then it becomes active. If you talk about how fun and beneficial things are when going green, for instance, I put on my listserv, neighborhood listserv, I just sent out a question. How many other people are like to hang laundry? And, or what was it? Like the zen of hanging laundry. And got a lot of responses. Oh, I do too. And, you know, even little things like that are helping to shift the culture. And then this was suggested, and I forgot who suggested it, but I really like this second point here. And that is showing concern for other people's personal lives, and then making a suggestion for how they might adapt. This is one of the best ways to open up a climate conversation. And Catherine Hayhoe is a climate scientist. I'm sure y'all are mostly familiar with her, and I recommend following her recommendations as to how to take action. So let's see. Okay, yes. So one of the ways that I like to show concern is using this chart as a way, as a, let's see, as a chart, basically, of course, as an illustration of why we should be concerned, and using stripes, global warming stripes, which was created by Peter Hawkins, a climate scientist. Is it Peter Hawkins? Ed Hawkins, a climate scientist in Europe, and who has studied temperature change over time. And this is Massachusetts since 1895. And using this as a way to kind of ground a conversation. We have an article in Climate Steps where various people around the world talked about how these graphs really brought home to them what was happening to their region. And you can, again, do kind of passive active communication because you can wear masks, ties, handbags, even with these global warming stripes. So I can put a link for that if interested. So some of the ways to tie climate change to people and open this conversation is really to talk about, besides heat, other ways that it's going to influence us. A lot of people, of course, think immediately of sea level rise, but there are severe storms, fires, other disasters, but there's also infectious diseases and invasive species and agriculture. Refugees needing homes, all of these will affect most regions, so except for the sea level rise. So getting people to think about how it's going to influence them personally is a good way to talk not only about mitigation of climate change, how to prevent climate change, but to get people thinking, I'm going to have to start preparing for it. And one way, to get people to start preparing for it is like, okay, do I really want to buy this land in South Florida? Do I really want to do an addition to my house? If it's going to be in a region that's going to be really tricky for that. Anyways, to help people plan. Whoops. So there's another tool out there called Climate Explorer, where you can search by zip code. And as part of the Climate Resilience Toolkit, that with data from NOAA and NASA, it shows kind of how temperatures will rise. And it's a great tool to really illustrate to people. So DC, for instance, is going to have, by 2040, it's going to have 40, 95 plus degree days. Right now, we average 9. So in 20 years, we're going to average 40, 95 plus degree days. In 2100, we're going to average 80. And I'm not even, you can read, I'm not even going to say this out loud because my dad might be listening about what the temperature change is going to be in East Texas. Okay. Other active actions. Family, friend, neighborhood conversations. It not only helps people to discuss these issues, but it also helps people feel accepted. Joining groups is definitely a way to encourage more internal acceptance for taking action. And these conversations have really inspired groups and movements. So, obviously, Climate Steps, we started because 2 people took me to lunch. Citizen Climate Lobby, the guy who founded it was visiting 2 elderly women, I believe in a nursing home, and the conversation turned to climate change, and the elderly women asked him, well, what are you going to do about it? And so he started Citizen Climate Lobby, and now it's global. But you don't have to worry about global, you don't have to go that far. Sometimes I get exhausted thinking of the fact that Climate Steps is going global. But you can volunteer, you can work locally. This is a picture of Community Garden, which is, tackles so many issues of climate change. There are environmental book clubs. There are green clubs like Green Neighbors DC. So yeah. Okay, so also you can do advocacy, and a lot of these are still individual actions. You don't have to be part of a social group. You can do some of them, from your own home. You can write letters to social media editors talking about your concerns for your local community about climate change. You can send the Climate Explorer chart to your neighborhood listserv. You can do shoe strikes, which is now something that is beginning because of COVID. So many people aren't doing climate strikes, but they're instead putting their shoes out with a sign that this person is on a climate strike. You can volunteer for city planning committees. The city of DC recently redid their sustainability plan, and they asked for volunteers from the community to serve on the planning committees. You can, especially building resilience within your community is going to be extremely important for adaptation, and doing so through tool libraries, being an advocate for to the city for supportive tool libraries, which is where you can check out tools. This is a picture of one that I had no idea was it within 4 blocks of my house. I've lived in my neighborhood for 13 years, and I had no idea that a tool library existed because it wasn't advertised, it wasn't talked about in the community. It wasn't until our own group started looking into building a tool library that we found out that this existed. So these are incredible resources. And anyway, I can talk more about that, privately if you want, if you have any questions. Okay, so we've talked about, talked about community level, we talked about infrastructure, and I forgot the first one, but another one is political impacts. Yes, that's definitely an action we want to take, to vote, especially to campaign for certain representatives, to talk with representatives, especially local representatives. But one of the most impactful things that you as an individual can do that many people don't realize is to comment on public regulations. So the NEPA Act, which is the National Environmental Protection Act, I believe, opened the door for public commenting on environmental regulations. It's been shown that public comments do influence regulations, the actual language of regulations, the tone, but also some meat in the regulations. But it's also, I'm going to skip to the second bullet here, it also provides standing for court cases. Court cases have a harder time of being pursued if no comments were there previously. And part of it is when you put a comment into a public regulation, you are really saying, I could be affected by this. And then in a court case, if you show that you were affected or that somebody was affected for the same thing that you complained about, there's much more standing for court cases. And then, just changing, even talking locally, asking your city council to change something, it's very impactful. Recently, one guy wrote a letter in the city of DC complaining about the restriction of the amount of solar that we could add and to a particular house. So when I installed my solar 2 years ago, I was limited to 104% of the energy that I used. That's how much I could generate, was only 104% energy compared to what I used. Well, this guy wrote a letter, and now anybody in DC can install the equivalent of 200% because this one guy wrote a letter. And of course, it's great to involve media, reporters, etc. So, okay, so another individual area is corporate. And there is active communication with corporations. You can provide positive feedback, support. You can make recommendations to them. You can do product choices, boycotts, and divesting. Divesting, a lot of people questioned whether divesting actually makes an impact, but as a result of people starting this, it's a cultural shift has happened, and divesting is actually making a very large impact now on, well, I wouldn't say very large, but starting to make an impact on certain corporations. Another key thing is to form green teams within your employment organization. Our AAAS green team, we did clothing drives, but not only did we make the organization think more about green activities that we should do, but we also started writing newsletters, a green team newsletter, and so we were able to influence all the employees within AAAS. We were kind of green to begin with, we're scientists, but it helped. I mean, I never thought that our particular facilities lead would even consider composting in our kitchens. So I still don't know what happened there because I left before that decision was made. So basically, the takeaways for your resolutions and things to think about while you're taking action this year is really to try and focus on anything that supports public climate friendly infrastructure, anything that you can influence via commenting on public regulations, anything that could potentially have a ripple effect, a social multiplier effect. And that include especially anything that has kind of some active communication in it. And of course, if you can find anything that pulls all three together, that's fantastic. Okay, hold on one sec. So how to take action. We're going to, Climate Steps goal is to help people do that. So I'm going to outline just a few steps that we're going to take and some tools, and then basically open it up for questions and discussion. I think I've got 7 minutes left. So is that right? Okay.
Take as much time as you need.
Okay, thanks. So Climate Steps tagline is to provide the knowledge, means, and opportunities to take climate action, personally, socially, politically, and industry related. So we've got knowledge, means, and opportunities. So those are kind of 3 ways. Our goals are to help people new to climate action, especially take their first step. And then to help people pursue, grow towards further actions, especially those that are accurate and impactful. And then to help people learn about and trust the science behind the information. And then this might take a little bit more time to get started, but to connect people. Well, we have our own action supporting community, and we have a lot of mentoring that goes on within it. It's not formal, but it definitely, we have people who help each other. But to connect people to outside organizations is one of the key goals that we want to be able to do. So based on all the above, don't worry about reading all of this. You can read it later if you want. But what we have outlined as our priorities for Climate Steps based on what users want and everything that I've mentioned before is helping people understand the breadth, doing some mentoring, helping people prioritize actions based on their personal situations, and then to plan from there how to actually take those actions, and providing tools to help people do that, and then to help people share their progress with communities and neighbors and everybody. So one thing that we already have started, online is some planning tools. This picture is actually from a course I took. I think it's University of Minnesota or University of Michigan, called Act on Climate. That is an action plan where you have the type of action, you describe the action, you describe what's needed to take the action, you set a deadline for it, and then you describe the impact, and that helps you prioritize it. This kind of follows the same paradigm, I guess, as SMART. I don't know if y'all have heard of SMART, but whenever you want to plan something, you really want to be smart about it, which SMART stands for specific, measurable, actionable. I want to say R is realistic. I'm not sure. I forgot. And T is timely. So, for example, instead of saying, I'm going to start biking to work, that's so general. You don't know, when are you going to start biking to work? What all's required for you to start biking? How many days are you going to do it? And what's the impact of it? So if you outline those things, behavior change studies have found that you are much more likely to actually take the action. So we've developed our own climate action plan template. One template under transportation. Unfortunately, I need to update it because it has the wrong logo on it. So I went ahead and put this one in. But we want to provide tools to help people take smart actions. If you have interest in being involved and helping come up with some of these templates, I would love to talk to you more because I could use some assistance with that. We have one volunteer who's helping. Action Maps is another tool that Dr. Kat Russell, who used to work for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, has developed a system. It's online, so this is just a home version. It's not the form version of how to take action. So we're going to partner to come up with a computer version for that. Another thing a key thing that I'm going to be building hopefully here soon is basically a filter tool. So behavior change scientists have found out that a lot of people act based on what motivates them. They want to act on things connected to the reason for taking the action. So kind of building a filter tool to help people find the actions that really relate to them. So a lot of people are motivated due to health reasons, their children or the seventh generation, a local park. I'm personally very motivated by biodiversity issues, being a biologist. A lot of people are very focused on justice, local justice issues, or environmental justice. Some people are very motivated by their home, others by global issues. But there are also barriers and logistics. Some people don't mind, taking action that's only a little bit of impact. But others really want to be taking actions that have strong impact. Some people are very private, others are very social. And then there are barriers, which is it easy? Is it hard? Does it cost a lot? Is it going to cause problems in my neighborhood? Similar to, if I was to put up a climate change sign in my yard, currently in Texas, there's a good chance it could be run over or something in this particular community. So, there are some things that are more public than others. And then some people want to also grow my skills. Okay, so I've gone through a lot of stuff. Oh, sorry, last complex slide. A lot of people think that the more challenging an action, the more social action, higher the cost. If it's more global scale, that is going to have the higher impact. versus a local action, an easy one, or private or low cost. And that's not always true. It often is, but it's not always. You could take a lot of time to work on something that's social, that's high cost, and not have a large impact. Whereas you can do some stuff from your couch, like comment on public regulations, that has more of an impact. Now I need to I need to kind of do a scientific study and outline why that's the case and the various weight of carbon emissions and social multipliers, but not there yet. But that's just based on my experience and some of the factors that we've pulled, the figures that we'll pull together for Earth Hero. The other aspect is that we've got to consider is that not every action applies everywhere. And, you know, a renter, actually, I have a friend in Arkansas who cannot get solar. She cannot get solar. It's actually been put on a list for solar companies to avoid her region for some reason. She can't find out why. You know, not everything applies everywhere. I have a lot of people from India and Kenya and Nigeria in the group, and we have to be very cognizant that some of the easy stuff that we talk about really, they don't have any choice in the matter or ability to do that, whereas they can do some other things. There was this really great example last January where a woman in Australia during the fires asked, she was devastated by the fires, everybody was. She asked us in the group, through me, I posted the post for her, to plant a tree in and name them after, there were 2 different Australian names to use in memory of what was lost in the Australian fires. And so I posted that, and then one guy in Kenya said, okay, I'm going to go plant these trees immediately. And he went out in his yard and immediately planted 2 trees and named them as she suggested. So, you know, there are benefits and strengths to different groups, and bringing that experience to the equation is very valuable. Okay, so to sum, basically we're trying to bring in science to show the impact of individual actions, and then in how to plan, and then probably won't be able to tie in a tool yet with GPS to highlight local opportunities, but hopefully soon we'll be able to do that. And I think that is it. And one question that I would love to have into the discussion is, has this talk changed anyone's resolutions or goals for taking action? So, okay, I'll stop the share. Should I stop the share for now, or I'll just.
Yeah, you can do that so we can see folks' faces and see your face a little bigger while we're talking.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Thank you very much, Dr. Olson. This is super informative, and I think it's a different look than we've seen before on how to make impacts. So I'm super excited to hear all these different ideas. Folks, please go ahead and put your questions in there in the chat. I've been making notes, and I've got a lot of questions that I've thought of. So if I don't see ones coming in the chat, we're good. But I would really like to hear you guys and hear what you have for questions. So I'll start off with some of mine, and we'll keep watching to see if folks have other questions. But the first thing I thought of was a data-driven Earth Hero. Those features sound really intriguing. And I was wondering if it was you or Peter or Ben or maybe all three of you, that geek out on matching the science to the impact of the action?
So Peter and Ben are more the ones that geek out in doing the carbon emissions. And I'm the one who I like to get into the nitty gritty of the tips and how to best take an action. And yeah, so, but, and we have this one guy, Darren, who runs a climate change podcast up in Canada on the East Coast somewhere. He also geeks out a lot about the actions. So yeah, um, yeah. But I as I actually don't know the formulas for the carbon emissions, but where I've been, Darren and I, especially Darren, but we've been working on the multiplier effect, for the social actions, which are always hard to quantify, because how do you put a carbon emission on a social action? But if you can influence somebody, then that has a power of its own in some respects. So the great combination is, if you got a hybrid car, or you started biking, you can put a carbon emissions number with that, and then there's also a multiplier effect on top of it.
Excellent, cool. And I
Mhm.
like that idea that every one of these things that we think we're doing in the extreme for ourselves, there's that multiplier effect, and we should try to be cognizant of it too. Like, don't just ignore it. Pay
Yeah.
attention to it, see where it's working, and tell other people that that works for you, so that they can consider, oh wow, that could work for me too. So maybe that's another reason it inspires me to do these things.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of like, but I would never use it in public. The New York Times or whatever article that was that called it a behavior contagion. But now is may not be the time to use the
Right.
contagion phrase. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Another thought I had, or a question I had, this one's a little esoteric, so excuse everybody. Uh, but it's a personal question I have, because I found this to be so challenging. Instagram. Instagram posting is really challenging because you can't really give people information. It was a
Yeah.
tool that was all based around a picture.
Hmm.
And do you find that you've finally cracked that strategy, and you can really speak to the younger people who are really mixed up into Instagram as their main social media?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I haven't really figured that out yet. I had an intern who was very into Instagram. Unfortunately, her internship ended, but she was all into memes and trying to start getting us using memes. And but she designed a great slideshow. You can do slideshows now in Instagram. You can have, use those multiple picture effect to do slideshows. So she created some data information things. But one of the key problems with Instagram is you can't link to anything. You have to, type it in, and then you have to hope people cut and paste it, and that's frustrating. So
Yeah.
yeah,
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 it's a very strange tool, but I think we have to keep trying, because there is such a big demographic of folks that we definitely want to keep reaching out to.
yeah,
So I never want to stop trying Instagram, but I sometimes find it's not worth my time. So
yeah,
we need to figure out, maybe we need a support group.
yeah.
Okay. Here's a question. Have you had to revise any of your solutions as far as the impact data? In other words, you have moving targets, things that you thought you had a good read on the impact data, and then new information comes out and you need to revise things.
Yeah, not that I know of yet, although airplane data has been changing some. But that is one thing that we have in our strategic plan and our goals is we can't assume that once we have an action in climate steps or in Earth Hero, that basically science does change. It it's not that the action has changed or the impact necessarily has changed, although it can change if better fuels are used, etc. But more knowledge is gained, and we mostly follow we follow a lot in climate steps project drawdowns information and priority ratings, and between their last data output and the most recent one, they definitely changed the priorities of which action should be taken ahead of others. So it's a good reminder. So for instance, I think wind was much stronger, and now it's a little bit lower in the relative actions. So, or maybe it's vice versa, but yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Mhm.
Let's see, we have a question here from Kathy. In addition to drawdown, are there other guides, experts, or sources of information that you use to set priorities or form climate action plans for individuals and communities? And she gave the example of Mark Jacobson's Solutions Project.
Yeah, that's something I'm that what we're trying to rely on is each of us has our specific area. And yes, we're trying to find out, we're not going to just rely on Project Drawdown. Definitely there are other sources out there. And what I find interesting, what my personal role, especially in Earth Hero right now, is to bring in behavior change science. So doing a lot of research in that, whereas some other folks are concentrating on the carbon emissions and looking at the data for that.
Okay. Marion is asking the question, how do you deal with deniers? Is that something that you see people kind of trolling you at Climate Steps, or do you have questions from the folks that work with Climate Steps about how to deal with this?
Yeah, so actually I've had the first part of that, I've had very few trollers in Climate Steps, which has been great. But I have had some. Most people who come to Climate Steps already acknowledge climate change because they want to take action. In terms of just trying to help people talk to their relatives and others, a lot of people are asking that information. So that's where I'm building in a lot of the resources for like behavior change. I always recommend check out Catherine Hayhoe's website first, but really, there much of what climate science, climate denialism has to do is people are afraid of changing their behavior. They're afraid of change. And and it's hard to change. So a lot of stuff, I have met with people who've worked in the health field, studying tobacco smoking, and how to get over habits and triggers and things like that. How do you make that switch? And so trying to bring in that information as well. Did that answer that question?
I think so.
Okay.
Here's another question. This one's from Carol, and sorry I missed this earlier. What steps can we take to light a fire under our HOA to take some actions, like a community garden, community composting, allowing rooftop gardens, greenscaping, etc.?
Yeah. One of the first ones is to join the committee and become in charge of accounting, so that you can highlight to the HOA the benefits of green actions. And if you can't join the committee and become in charge of the accounting part, then do your own research and show how freedom lawns are much more environmentally and cost effective, environmentally friendly and cost effective. You know, the benefits of solar, not buying solar necessarily, but in many cities now you can lease your roof to solar. So pulling out, you know, examples of that. So yeah, just and really becoming part of the conversation.
Yeah, I like that idea. You gotta get in there and be part of the HOA, and maybe find another person or two so that you can form a block in the HOA.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, that's that's kind of a cool. And you know, just asking your neighbors to do that and how passionate you are about climate, they might start to care about it a little bit more too. So
Yeah, don't necessarily be a lone wolf in the meeting, you know, standing up and saying, but yeah, do talk to people before the meeting, express your concern, you know, and then approach if they're, you know, writing letters, etc. Yeah.
okay, here's a question from Jay. Have you included the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in your action steps?
Not yet, but yes, it's very important, extremely important. A lot of the Facebook users compare some of the steps we talk about to the Sustainable Development Goals. So that is something I need to do.
Okay, here's a question from Merrill. As your new administration ramps up, as our new administration ramps up to make good on their campaign promise to make climate a top priority, would you suggest a concentrated shift from individual to nationally focused actions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yes and no. I'm in between. I would say I don't like the idea of putting all of our expectations and weight on the very top, because I think simultaneously we need the culture shift. That's because in another 4 years passed very quickly, and another 4 years is going to pass very quickly. Biden is he's outlining his agenda. Now, admittedly, it's not as progressive as we probably need yet. And so we could use the national push by people to do that. But I think we also need the local push. I think we have a ton of people in the US. And many people can go, you know, to what suits them best. I would say that there's local action would still be extremely valuable.
Okay. And you know, I liked what you said about voting. I've been frustrated with people that have been saying vote is your number one thing you can do for climate for 4 years.
Yeah,
I mean, honestly, folks, voting is just something that we know we have to do, and we're all engaged. So we don't ever want to depreciate how important voting is, but let's never answer the question with what can I do with something that only happens once every 2 years. It's just not enough. And so I appreciate that you mentioned that. In fact, I'm also very concerned that the choices that we get by the time we're talking about an election, maybe not the primary, but the election, sometimes the choices that you have, you're still not very convinced that the folks that you're electing into office are going to get it done. So
yeah,
it's about
yeah,
pressuring folks after the election and working with your elected officials all the time, not just when they're elected.
yeah.
Um, let's see. Something that struck me as interesting, you work with scientists. I'm not going to question your choice, but you mentioned 5 years kind of as a deadline at some point.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about how you choose that as a timeline? I'm thinking that that was a conversation you've had with people.
Yeah, it's a conversation, but actually, a recent study came out that confirmed there was a study a couple years ago, and I can't remember the titles of it, but I will find the links and share them afterwards. Um, but there have been a couple studies that have shown that the we have actually the IPCC was one of them, was one of the first ones that said we had 6 to 7 years to help prevent a 2.0 increase in temperature. Uh, yes, in temperature. And then recently a study came out in 2020 that confirmed that, accounting for time, that we had that. I did just see a headline that we're already reached that 2.0. 2.0 is basically the threshold for extremely dangerous climate change and irreversible climate change. I'll have to find the link to that recent study. But yes,
Yeah,
that's what I'm aware of. Yeah.
yeah, I just thought I'd ask because what we see is that the planners, the regulators, our elected officials, they love to set these long-term
Yeah.
goals and deadlines, and our climate scientists seem to want to work within that framework because
Hmm.
it's something that they can put the math around. But I think the folks in the action community really want to stop talking about specific times and specific dates and
Yeah.
how many years, and really just talk about as much action as we can afford right now, as much action as we can think of right now. And so I'm not contesting what you say with 5. I'm excited because
Yeah.
it's quicker than most people are talking about. Most people say you need to do this in the next 12 or 10 years, and we just really
Yeah. Yeah.
lowering
By
that number to like,
2030 or
yeah, it's got to happen now.
yeah.
So I appreciate that
Yeah.
though. Um,
Well, there's a oh, sorry.
Go
There's a
ahead.
danger to saying, yeah, 5 years, 6 years, because some people say, well, we're doomed. We're going to give up because we can't do it by then. But we can do a lot actually by then.
Yeah,
Um, but also, I think if we don't have those numbers, what you just said about, people doing what they can and you know that's all subjective. Things become much higher priority if you realize that change is happening very quickly. So, of course, we can't stop after 5 or 6 years. We've got a lot to do.
yes.
But yeah, yeah.
Allison asks, do you have any tips for how to talk with neighbors who don't believe in climate change?
Um, So I'm in East Texas right now. So I would say my main tip is to start slowly. Just let them think of you as an environmental kook at first. That's okay, but just keep uh, you know talking about your concern about the environment, others, partner and on the ranch, and I said, I'm concerned about what the future is going to bring for cattle ranching in East Texas because of the temperature. And then, talking about the weather is always a good inroad, but then talking about, the future of especially farming communities, that's a very important thing. And if you're not in a farming agricultural area, being able to um, talk to people about their food resources or things like that is a very good inroad. So
I,
yeah.
I like what you said there about don't be worried about them thinking that you're crazy. Just be yourself and be honest with them. There's no sense in trying to stealth your way into this. Like if you have a
Yeah.
strong passion about the climate, let them know that. And then when they ask you 6 months later, have you gotten over that climate thing? You say, no, I've doubled down. I'm twice as, I'm twice
Yeah.
as into this as I was last time. And I think, people have to respect that. You're not talking about some, I'm really into football and now I'm twice as into
Mhm.
football. You're talking about something that has penalties and costs. And I
Yeah.
think when people see how dedicated and passionate you are, that has to leave a little bit of an impact with them. They're
Yeah.
like, wow, he's
Yeah.
really into that. She's really into that. So maybe I should be thinking about it too.
And have your resources handy, which I should have had a couple more resources handy, but yeah, have your be able to point people to um, don't say government sites, but say NASA sites. People really respect NASA and NOAA. Um, don't refer people to the EPA sites or anything like that. So yeah, so that's another N, I think.
Okay. Um, what are the best personal, this is from Kathy, what are the best personal carbon footprint calculator audit tools out there?
Well, that's a good question. So right now, I'm actually thinking that our Earth Hero is the app is. I have a website page on climate steps that's a little bit outdated that reviews some other tools. Some of the It depends. So there are calculators out there, and then there are calculators that are connected to donation sites. And you have to be a little careful with the latter because often the math isn't really that visible. Um, but if you just find one where the math is really visible behind the site, those are usually very good. There are others where um, they don't really have a range of actions. Some are just for flying, some are for driving. Okay, so I'm thinking okay, there are a couple of types of calculators. There are some for like your home footprint where you can put in your utility information, your utility costs and how many kilowatts you're using, and that can calculate your footprint. And then there are transportation ones where how much you drive, commute, or how much flying you do. Those tend to be very different calculators. Um, one good one that I've used has been Native Energy, and I need to review. I haven't looked at it in a year because I haven't been flying in a year. But they include other things like trains or they used to trains, and that's a very useful comparison. By the way, trains totally rock. They totally blow past cars and flying. So anyway, that's a good question, and we need to get somebody to update our page. But you can check out our page and then let me know if you have any ideas for
But but
better sites.
but Earth Hero, that's a lot of what it's about, right? It's trying to help
Yeah,
you understand. Okay,
yeah.
cool.
Hmm.
Um, this one comes from Chua. I hope I'm saying that name correctly. What are the most effective things we can do to influence the Biden administration to take major steps to decrease fossil fuel use and increase regenerative farming, et cetera?
So um, I think basically, you're for that you don't want to like focus on the top down necessarily. I'm personally hoping that Biden will reinstate the website that was like if 100,000 people signed up on a petition for the government to do something that did address that, that's one particular way. But I would focus on maybe talking to, doing your research and finding out who the committees are that are working on specific questions, who the researchers are, who the particular admin people are, and then contact them, email them, etc. Petitions really don't work that well. So I wouldn't focus on petitions. I would focus on more trying to get more not face-to-face, obviously not in this time, but more actual letters written to people, actual real people.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that too, that there is that idea that the feds could do this, or it could be done locally. But we have to remember that even if the federal government does step in to do something, let's hope that they do, to implement that work, it does have to be implemented here at the local level.
Yeah.
And so you have a lot of power in helping to prepare for what's going to happen here in our region. And I say our region because I know we have some folks that have tuned in, not necessarily in San Diego, but from all over. But it's important to also understand that those projects don't get done locally if they weren't ready when the money's prepared. And it sounds awful, but that's true. So if you want to work with local groups, talking about regenerative agriculture, talking about decreasing fossil fuel use, there are definitely local organizations that are out there. My organization, Sierra Club, is one of them. We're out there right now trying to decarbonize San Diego, and some of what we do may be contingent on the bigger plans that are happening at the federal level. So we put pressure back up to the feds as well, but we prepare those projects and those policies so that they're ready when and if we're ready to all act together. So
yeah, some federal plans can't happen without states agreeing to them, permits or infrastructure changes, things like that. So yeah, I agree.
And Dr. Olson, I like what you said about trains. We're battling right now to try to get better mass transit here in San Diego. And as much as the planners would have loved to set up an awesome train network here, they did have that as their initial idea. Money was the limiting factor, and they took all the trains back out of their plan. They're kind of flipping towards bus rapid transit because it's a little bit more flexible, and they realize that if a certain population doesn't adopt the mass transit, they can put the buses somewhere else and make use of them. But it takes so darn long to put the trains in and takes so much extra money that they're cautious about going all in with trains. So we need to tell them that we need it. And the more people that tell them, no, this is what we understand the future will be. We will have mass transit trains all over San Diego. Let them know that's your future. And that helps a lot.
Yeah, and if you federal support for things like that, for infrastructure changes, can be critical. So working multiple scales is very important. Two quick things. Don't worry about calling me Dr. Olson. You can call me Annette. And another thing I wanted to mention while I'm thinking about it, that is a very good use of people's time, is to volunteer as a citizen scientist. And there are two reasons for that. One of which is a lot of science is needed, a lot of in the field science about impacts and weather and species and things like that.
Yeah, and our own
go ahead. Okay. And I don't want to link these as directly related. You should do citizen science because you love science, you love the outdoors, and you want to help. a side benefit to this is, as a citizen scientist, representatives, state representatives tend to listen to regular people who have been out in the field and who know these things versus a wonk who, you know, and so it can be of benefit to say, look, I've been out there, I've seen this, and talk on a personal level to your representative. So, yeah.
That's a great point. So you're saying they respect the layperson's viewpoint sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, other constituents and what's happening to them. And yeah.
Yeah. And I'll point out that our own Jay Kloppenstein is very interested in citizen science. So if folks want to get into that, just reach out to North County Climate Change Alliance, to Marion, and we can put you in touch with Jay to talk about that. I really liked what you had to say about passive social change and influencing people by example. And then you described also the active form of doing that, where you realize, oh, that's happening. Let me try to make it happen even more. And I was wondering, have you seen that done intentionally? In other words, are there programs where people say, electric bikes would be great. Why don't we give some electric bikes out in these communities and make sure that other people see the benefits of electric bikes? Can we do that as individuals? Can we find ways to take the thing that worked for us and then multiply it by getting it into neighboring communities?
Yeah. There is a great example of this. And I hate to keep bringing up solar because solar is only just one potential tool. But I'm sorry, I'm shaking my camera here. There is a organization in DC that started off as basically one woman, became very versed in solar energy. She decided to form a kind of a nonprofit, and one of their main goals is to actually install solar panels in low-income communities. And to be viable, they also sell, you know, solar to those who can afford it. And so really trying to broaden the concept of what you know, environmental tools people have and where. And of course, that becomes visible to others. And there are a lot of local groups that do that. I do know that some recommendations I've made have been, you know, donate to a local bike share in a city that's not yours. Just help build up bike share, if you know, which is, you know, basically where city run bikes that are available for people to use. And yeah, and I'll probably think of another one here. My last example of an active communication was, you know, earlier this week we were without power for 3.5 days, and when we got power due to the snowstorm that went through Texas. And when it came back, I was texting somebody and I was like, yay, the power's back. Okay, so it's coal-fired power. And, you know, I just put that little nugget in his head that, oh, yeah, it is coal-fired power. And so, you know, you can do it large or small or whatever. But and, you know, trying to plan for definite actions that way instead of relying of, oh, I'm going to put little tidbits in here and there, but trying to actually plan for it is definitely the best way to go.
Great, thank you. I think we want to wrap up here, but don't go away, folks, because we have one more thing that we'd like to share. And I think I had draw down on my screen here. Let me share my screen. So Annette, can you see that on your screen?
Yeah. Oh, yay.
So we have planted a tree in your honor. We will send you out this certificate. So there's a tree that should you get the chance, you could go and visit it, but know that it was planted in your honor. We know that trees are a really important part, and deforestation is an important problem. So we like to present this to our speakers so that you can remember that the time that you put together in making this presentation was very worthwhile for us. We very much appreciate you coming and speaking with us and giving us some new perspective on how our individual actions, even if we can't get together and work with other groups, or maybe we do it together, you know, alternating efforts. But this is going to be empowering for people. So we really appreciate you sharing these ideas with us tonight.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And I enjoyed doing so. And if you have any questions, y'all are welcome to email me. And it's just climatesteps@gmail.com. And yeah. And thanks also for the feedback and through the questions.
We'll send out an email as a follow-up to this presentation. So Annette, any links that you want to share with us, we'll put it in there.
Okay.
And that way folks will be able to find Earth Hero, Climate Steps, and your third one, which was the Facebook group, Climate Steps Facebook group.
Yeah.
But any other links, feel free to pass them on to Marion, and she'll put them in that the next newsletter. So folks, and we'll have the video. So if you enjoyed this, if you got something out of it, we hope that you share it with other folks and get them involved in the climate movement for sure.
Yeah.
If folks, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying thanks. Yeah.
If folks would like to unmute themselves, we can all say thank you to Annette for joining us tonight. And I know it's been a hard few weeks for you, Annette, so we really appreciate you going out of your way to speak with us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
very much, Annette. It was great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Annette.
Oh, I like talking to y'all.
Bye.
Great.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.